Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow. So what is Yuriko? Yuriko is a 3 mana ninja, but don't mind this 3 mana at all. The only thing we care about is Commander Ninjutsu, blue and black. So for blue and black, return an unblocked attacker you control to hand. Put this card onto the battlefield from your hand or the command zone, tapped and attacking. So if you have any sort of cheap creature, especially one with evasion, you can play that, then attack with it, and then Commander Ninjutsu Yuriko out. And specifically, the Commander Ninjutsu gets around any sort of commander attack, so even if your opponent kills Yuriko, you can always just keep Commander Ninjutsuing it out. And then it has the second effect: whenever a ninja you control, that means Yuriko, deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand, so draw the card. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So what you want to be doing is playing a cheap creature with evasion on turn 1, and then Commander Ninjutsuing it with Yuriko on the next turn. You also, in this deck, want to be bouncing Yuriko back to your hand so that you can ninjutsu it again and keep getting the trigger over and over. So what do we got? Well, for bounce, we have Consign to Oblivion, Odawara, and Submerge. For card draw, we don't actually need that much because Yuriko is our card draw, but for what little we have, we of course have Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. We also have Ninja of the Deep Hours, which is a ninja that just draws a card when you hit them with it. Cephalid Colosseum, and Nashi Moon Sage's Scion. This is a ninja for 4 ninja mana that is, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of each player's library. Until end of turn, you may play one of those cards, but by paying for the card with life rather than the mana value. Then, of course, we've got Console Oracle. Why wouldn't we? Bunch of counter spells to protect Yuriko or just disrupt our opponent, including Commandeer and Misdirection. We've got Temporal Trespass as our 1 extra turn spell. And do note that Yuriko deals damage to all of our opponents based on the mana value of the spell that we reveal off of it. So anything that's expensive and can then be reduced in cost is very good. So Commandeer, Misdirection, Force of Will, Temporal Trespass, these are all good options. We've got Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual as a little bit of fast mana. We have a bunch of Dimir lands, with some notable cards being Agadeem's Awakening and especially Seagate Restoration, since Seagate is both a land and also counts as a 7 mana spell for Uriko's trigger. And then we've got what I'm calling Ninja Fodder, which is basically any creatures that we can use to ninjutsu out Yuriko. We'll come back to this in a bit. A little bit of protection in March of Swirling Mist. We've also got a little bit of ramp, but we don't actually need that much ramp in this deck. In fact, we need less ramp in this deck than in pretty much every other deck in EDH, because all we need to do is have just 2 mana to Commander Ninjutsu out Yuriko, and we're good. So just the best ramp spells. We're not even playing Sol Ring. Yes, we have found a deck that doesn't play Sol Ring. And then removal, we've got, as seen before, Cabal Pit, Consign to Oblivion, Deadly Rollick, Dismember, Force of Despair. Destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn, and you can pitch cast it by exiling a black spell from your hand. We've got March, Orcish Bowmasters, Odawara, Snuff Out, Submerge. Curtain's Call is destroy 2 target creatures, and it costs 1 less for each opponent. So this basically costs 3 mana to destroy 2 creatures. And then the last one is Contagion. 5 mana, black instant. You may pay 1 life and remove a black card in your hand from the game rather than pay Contagion's mana cost. Put 2 -2/-1 counters on 1 or 2 target creatures. So another just cheap way of getting rid of opposing enemy creatures. Possibly, we really just need to get rid of blockers, basically, because after the first ninjutsu from Yuriko itself doesn't have evasion of any kind. So we want to be able to keep killing their creatures and keep hitting them with Yuriko, which is not always a guarantee, even though we have 3 different opponents. Then we've got some stacks in Cursed Totem, Dothy Voidwalker, Grafdigger's Cage, Null Rod, Opposition Agent, and Orcish Bowmasters. We've got a pretty unique sweeper here in Crippling Fear. You choose a creature type, and then creatures that aren't of the chosen type get -3/-3. So you just choose Ninja, Yuriko doesn't die. Most other creatures by this point in the game will probably die. A whole bunch of tutors. The top deck tutors in particular being better here than they are in most other circumstances, because we can tutor exactly what we want to the top and draw it with Yuriko and drain out the opponent's life. And then that, of course, leaves us with some other spells that don't neatly fall into any specific category, but we've got Enter the Infinite, which should probably just win us the game on the spot because we can draw into Console Oracle. It's also just a 12 mana sorcery that will 12 all of our opponents when we hit it off Yuriko. Brainstorm, which puts stuff back on top of our deck for Yuriko. Cover of Darkness is an enchantment that gives a chosen creature type fear. So you choose Ninja, and then Yuriko has fear and is harder to block. And then we've got Street Wraith and Shadow of Mortality. Street Wraith is just a 5 mana value spell that we can potentially hit off of Yuriko that we can just cycle. And Shadow of Mortality is potentially a 2 mana 7/7 that if we hit it off of Yuriko is 15 to all of our opponents as well. And then the Ninja Fodder. So a whole bunch of creatures that are cheap, often have evasion, and are just easy ways of getting Yuriko into play on the cheap. So we've got Changeling Outcast, which is unblockable for one. Dothy Voidwalker, which has Shadow, which is basically unblockable and has the additional stacks ability. We've got Fairy Dream Thief, which is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, ETB Surveil 1, and it also can be exiled from your graveyard by paying 3 mana to draw and lose a life. Fairy Seer, which is a 1/1 with flying that scries 2 when it enters. Fourth Bridge Prowler, ETB, you may have target creature get -1/-1. This is actually relevant for hitting opposing, like, Mana Dorks, for example. Ingenious Infiltrator, it's itself a ninja, and is deal combat damage to player, draw a card, so it's another Ninja of the Deep Hours, basically, but just in Dimir. We've got Ingenious Prodigy, which is a 0/1 with Skulk, and then we can pay more mana into it to give it +1 counters that we can then remove to draw a card on our upkeep. So it's variable. We can either play it cheap and then it's hard to block, or we can play it more expensively when we've got more mana and then draw cards. It also works very well with ninjutsu because, and a lot of these spells do, like Fourth Bridge Prowler, anything that has an ETB trigger works really well with ninjutsu because we pick it back up and then can replay it. Memnite, coming down on turn 0, or turn 1 rather, is pretty good. Mist Syndicate Naga is another ninja. It ninjas for 3. And it's whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a token copy of it. Mistblade Shinobi ninjas for 1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may bounce a creature. Very good in the ninja deck. Moon Circuit Hacker is basically another Ninja of the Deep Hours / Ingenious Infiltrator, but every turn after you hit someone with it, when it didn't enter the battlefield, you're just looting. You only get to straight up draw a card the first time, unless you ninja it back. Moth Dust Changeling, which tap an untapped creature you control to give it flying, so kind of a flyer in that regard, but it's also, since it's a changeling, is a ninja itself, so it applies to the other ninja effects in our deck. Nashi, as stated before, Orcish Bowmasters, Ornithopter, like Memnite, good just to run out really fast. Prosperous Thief is a ninja that we can ninja out for 2 mana, and whenever one or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. Sakashima Student, which is a ninja clone. Signal Pest. Silver Fur Master is a ninja that is a ninja lord. So ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate, and other ninjas and rogues get +1/+1. Skull Snatcher, ninjas for 1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 2 cards in their graveyard from the game. Spectral Sailor, 1/1 Flying Flash, and 4 mana to draw a card. Thousand Faced Shadow, it's a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, or you can ninja it for 4, and when it enters the battlefield from your hand, if it's attacking, so basically if you ninja'd it, you create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. The token enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. Universal Automaton is a 1 mana changeling, so it's basically a 1 mana ninja. And then lastly, Wingcrafter, which soul bonds with a creature and then gives itself and that creature flying. And notably, Yuriko triggers not just on itself, but on all ninjas, so it does benefit to have multiple ninjas, so you get multiple triggers. So the idea here is on turn 1, we want to play an evasion creature, at least one, and then on turn 2, we want to attack and then Commander Ninjutsu out Yuriko, and then we will just continue to draw at least 1 extra card every single turn with Yuriko, if not more than that with more ninjas. And this comes out so fast that it's hard for our opponents to interact with us meaningfully this early in the game. We use all of these various effects, plus ninjas and the Yuriko trigger, to just keep generating more card advantage by ripping more cards off the top over and over. And then, even though we don't do that much damage to our opponents off of all of these dinky creatures hitting them, we do deal a ton of damage to them via Yuriko's trigger by hitting the expensive spells like Enter the Infinite, Shadow of Mortality, but even cheaper spells like Street Wraith can add up after we hit our opponents enough times. And then we can stack side our opponents a little bit if we need to do that too. Plus, we have a ton of removal, so any creature-based combos or stacked pieces that would normally hurt us can be easily dealt with. And yep, that is basically Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow in EDH.